The dust-choked air of Tascosa, Texas in 1885 carried whispers about the woman with dirt-stained trousers and calloused hands who dared to think she could work alongside men in the silver mines. Naomi Turner stood at the edge of town, her small valise clutched in one hand, the rejection letter from the Lone Star Mining Company crushed in the other, and nowhere left to go. 3 weeks earlier, Naomi had arrived in Tascosa with dreams as vast as the Texas sky. Her father's passing had left her with nothing but mining knowledge and an uncanny ability to spot promising veins that even seasoned miners often missed. What she lacked in physical strength, she made up for in geological intuition, a gift her father had cultivated in her since she was old enough to distinguish quartz from limestone. The foreman's laughter still stung her ears. "A woman in the mines. Next you'll tell me cattle can fly. Go find work washing clothes or cooking meals, miss. That's where a woman belongs." She had persisted, showing up daily, offering to prove her worth for half the pay. The miners had grown increasingly hostile, throwing rocks at her, calling her names she dared not repeat. Yesterday, they'd cornered her, threatened worse if she returned. The sheriff had simply suggested she stop causing trouble by trying to do a man's job. Now, with her last dollar spent on a room at the boarding house she could no longer afford, Naomi faced the brutal Texas sun with nowhere to turn. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, saving her final pennies for a telegram that never received a reply. "Miss, you planning to stand there until you turn to dust?" Naomi turned sharply, startled by the deep voice. A tall man sat atop a chestnut mare, observing her with curious eyes. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the sun-weathered skin around piercing blue eyes that assessed her with neither judgment nor mockery, a refreshing change from what she'd grown accustomed to in Tascosa. "I'm simply considering my options, sir," she replied, straightening her spine despite her exhaustion. The man dismounted with ease that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. "Must be mighty slim options to have you staring at the horizon for the past half hour." He approached, and she noticed he walked with a slight limp. "Jackson Quincy," he said, extending a hand. "I run the Double Q Ranch about 5 miles west." Naomi hesitated before taking his hand. His grip was firm but not crushing, a courtesy most men didn't extend to women. "Naomi Turner. You're that woman who's been trying to get work at the Lone Star Mine." It wasn't a question. Naomi's cheeks flushed with humiliation. "News travels fast. Small town," he replied with a shrug. "Folks got nothing better to do than gossip." He studied her for a moment longer. "You know anything about horses, Miss Turner?" The question caught her off guard. "I grew up around them. My father and I traveled from mining camp to mining camp. A good horse was essential." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "And can you cook?" "Poorly," she admitted with unexpected honesty that surprised even herself. "But I can identify a silver vein better than most men who have been mining their whole lives. I can read the land, tell you where water's likely to be found, and mend just about anything that's broken." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Is that so?" "It is." Naomi lifted her chin. "But apparently none of those skills matter because I wear skirts. Well, when I'm not wearing trousers, which seems to offend people even more." To her surprise, Jackson Quincy laughed. Not the cruel, mocking laughter she'd become accustomed to, but a genuine sound of amusement. "Miss Turner, I've got a mare about to foal, a broken windmill that's driving me to madness, and a house that hasn't seen a proper cleaning since my housekeeper left 2 months ago. I don't care if you wear skirts, trousers, or a gunny sack, your hands are needed at the Double Q." Naomi stared at him, suspicion narrowing her eyes. "What exactly are you offering, Mr. Quincy?" "A job," he said simply. Room, board, and fair wages. The ranch needs help and you need work. Seems straightforward enough to me. And you don't mind hiring a woman who's been run out of town for being too bold. Jackson adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the midday sun. Miss Turner, I judge folks by what they can do, not what others say they can't. He glanced at her small valise. Is that all you have? Naomi nodded, still wary but desperately in need of the opportunity he offered. Yes. Then I suggest we get moving before the afternoon heat makes traveling unbearable. He reached for her bag. May I? She relinquished it with reluctance born of years of self-reliance. Thank you. Jackson secured her valise to his saddle and then offered her a hand up. The mare can carry us both until we reach the ranch. I've got a gentle gelding there that might suit you. As Naomi settled behind him in the saddle, careful to maintain a proper distance, she wondered if she was making another mistake. But the alternative was starvation, or throwing herself on the mercy of men who wanted things she wasn't willing to give. Why are you helping me? She asked as they rode away from Tascosa, the town growing smaller behind them. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. Because 14 years ago, I was the one standing at the edge of town with nowhere to go. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. I'm just passing along the favor. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly as they rode across the open range. Naomi had grown up in mining camps across Colorado and Nevada, but Texas had its own distinct beauty, vast and unapologetic. The Double Q Ranch came into view as they crested a small rise. A modest but well-maintained house, several outbuildings, a corral with horses and cattle grazing in the distance. It's not much, Jackson said as they approached, but it's mine free and clear. It's beautiful, Naomi replied honestly. After weeks of rejection and hostility, the sight of the peaceful ranch was like an oasis in the desert. A young man emerged from the barn as they rode in. Boss was starting to wonder if you'd been waylaid by bandits. His eyes widened when he noticed Naomi. Didn't realize you were bringing company. Curtis, this is Miss Turner. She'll be working here. Jackson dismounted and then helped Naomi down. Miss Turner, this is Curtis. He helps with the cattle. The young man touched his hat respectfully. Madam. Miss Turner will be staying in the back bedroom, Jackson continued. Would you mind taking her things there while I show her around? Of course, boss. Curtis took Naomi's valise and headed toward the house. Jackson led Naomi toward the barn. We'll start with the horses. That mare I mentioned is due any day now. The interior of the barn was clean and well organized, surprising Naomi, who had expected a bachelor's neglect. 5 horses occupied stalls, and at the end, a beautiful bay mare watched them approach with wary eyes. This is Penny, Jackson said, his voice softening. She's a good girl, but it's her first foal and she's nervous. Naomi approached slowly, making soft clicking sounds with her tongue. The mare's ears flicked forward with interest. Hello, beautiful, Naomi murmured, extending her hand palm up. After a moment's hesitation, Penny stretched her neck to sniff Naomi's hand. She's lovely. Jackson watched with approval. She likes you. That's a good sign. When is she due? Any day now, according to the man I bought her from. Though I'm beginning to wonder if he knew what he was talking about. Jackson ran a hand along Penny's neck. I've been sleeping in the hayloft to keep an eye on her. Naomi examined the mare more carefully. I'd say within the week, looking at her. My father and I once helped deliver a foal at a mining camp in Colorado. The owner had no idea what to do. That experience might come in handy soon, Jackson remarked. Now, about that windmill. The tour continued the windmill with its broken gear, the vegetable garden that had seen better days, the chicken coop, and finally the house. The dwelling was modest but sturdy. A kitchen, a sitting room and 3 bedrooms. True to Jackson's word, it needed a thorough cleaning, but it was far from the disaster Naomi had expected. "This will be your room," Jackson said, opening a door to reveal a simple but comfortable space with a bed, dresser, and small window overlooking the corral. "Curtis has already brought your things. The door has a lock," he added, sensing her unspoken concern. "Your privacy will be respected here, Miss Turner." "Thank you, Mr. Quincy." "Jackson, please. Mr. Quincy was my father, and he's been gone 10 years now." Naomi nodded. "Then I'm Naomi, not Miss Turner." "Fair enough." Jackson gestured toward the kitchen. "Let's discuss your duties and wages." At the kitchen table, Jackson laid out his expectations. Help with the horses, especially Penny. Fix the windmill if she could. General maintenance around the ranch, and some cooking and cleaning. In exchange, he offered room, board, and wages comparable to what Curtis received, more than fair, especially for a woman in 1885. "Do we have an agreement?" Jackson asked when he'd finished. Naomi considered the offer. It wasn't mining, but it was honest work that would utilize her skills. And it came with respect she hadn't found elsewhere. "We do, on one condition." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Which is, if I ever discover silver on your land, we negotiate a new arrangement." There was a twinkle in her eye that suggested she wasn't entirely serious. A slow smile spread across Jackson's face. "Deal. Though I think you'll find cattle more reliable than silver in these parts." That evening, after a simple meal that Jackson prepared, "My cooking's not much, but it'll keep you alive until you settle in." Naomi sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and purples. For the first time in weeks, the knot of anxiety in her chest had loosened. She had a roof over her head, work for her hands, and an employer who valued her skills. Jackson joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "It's strong enough to stand a spoon in, fair warning." Naomi accepted the cup with a grateful nod. "I grew up drinking mining camp coffee. I doubt yours could be worse." They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell across the ranch. Crickets began their nightly chorus, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "Why mining?" Jackson asked finally. "Of all the things a woman might aspire to, why choose something so masculine, dangerous, unsuitable?" Naomi supplied. "I was going to say challenging, but yes, those two." Naomi sipped her coffee, gathering her thoughts. "My father was a miner. My mother died when I was 6, so he raised me in mining camps across the West. He didn't know what to do with a little girl, so he treated me like the son he never had. Taught me everything he knew about minerals, rock formations, how to spot a promising vein." She smiled at the memory. "I loved it. The excitement of discovery, the puzzle of reading the land. When he died last year, continuing his work seemed the only way to honor him." "I'm sorry about your father," Jackson said quietly. "Thank you." Naomi stared into her coffee. "The irony is, he always said I had a better eye for silver than he did. Said I could feel it somehow. But no mining operation will hire a woman, no matter how skilled." "Their loss," Jackson commented. "Though I can't say I'm entirely sorry, since their short-sightedness brought you to the double Q." Naomi looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since they'd met. In the fading light, she could see the crow's feet around his eyes' laugh lines. Her father would have called them, and the slight crookedness to his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his face, an openness that invited trust. "What about you?" she asked. "You mentioned standing at the edge of town with nowhere to go." Jackson leaned back in his chair, stretching his legs in front of him. "That's a story for another evening, I think." He stood, collecting her empty cup. Dawn comes early on a ranch. You should get some rest." Naomi recognized the deflection but didn't press. They were still strangers after all. "Good night, Jackson." "Good night, Naomi. Welcome to the Double Q." Naomi's first week at the ranch passed in a blur of activity. True to her word, she tackled the windmill first, spending 2 days diagnosing the problem and crafting a replacement gear from materials Jackson had in his workshop. Her solution wasn't pretty, but it worked, and when water began flowing into the cattle trough again, the look of admiration on Jackson's face made her chest swell with pride. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, watching the windmill's blades turn smoothly in the Texas breeze. "Mining equipment breaks down constantly," Naomi explained, wiping grease from her hands. "When you're 50 miles from the nearest town, you learn to fix things yourself, or you don't eat." In addition to the windmill, Naomi revitalized the neglected garden, repaired a leaky roof on the chicken coop, and began the process of deep cleaning the house. She also spent time each day with Penny, checking on the mare's progress and building trust. Jackson, for his part, gave her space to work but was never far away if she needed assistance. They fell into an easy rhythm, taking meals together and spending evenings on the porch, exchanging stories of their respective pasts, though Naomi noticed that Jackson still carefully avoided discussing how he'd come to own the Double Q, or what had happened 14 years ago. On the 7th night, as they sat watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky, Jackson finally opened up. "I was 16 when I left home," he began without preamble. "My father was a drunk who used his fists more often than his words. My mother had died years before, and there was nothing keeping me there." He spoke matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "I worked my way west, taking whatever jobs I could find: stable boy, farmhand, cattle driver. Ended up in Tascosa during a particularly harsh winter with no money and no prospects." Naomi listened silently, giving him the same respect he'd shown when she spoke of her past. "Old man Quincy found me half frozen behind his general store. Instead of running me off, he gave me a job and a place to stay. Taught me everything about ranching." Jackson's voice softened with affection. "He had no children of his own, and when he died, he left me the Double Q. Even gave me his name legally. Said I'd earned the right to carry it." "That's why you helped me," Naomi said quietly. "You're passing on his kindness." Jackson nodded. "Life's hard enough without people putting obstacles in your way just because of who you are or where you came from." Before Naomi could respond, a frantic whinny from the barn shattered the peaceful evening. "Penny." Jackson was on his feet instantly, Naomi right behind him. They rushed to the barn where they found the mare pacing her stall, sides heaving. "She's in labor," Naomi confirmed, quickly assessing the situation. "Has the water broken?" Just before I heard her cry out. Jackson was already gathering clean straw. "Good, let's give her space but stay close." Naomi removed her outer shirt, leaving her in a simple cotton undershirt. This could take a while. What followed was a tense night as Penny labored to deliver her foal. Naomi and Jackson took turns soothing the distressed mare, offering water and monitoring her progress. Around 3 in the morning, Naomi noticed a change in Penny's behavior. "It's coming now," she whispered to Jackson, who had been dozing against the stall door. "See how she's positioning herself." Sure enough, within minutes they could see the foal's front hooves and nose emerging. "Everything looks normal," Naomi said with relief. "The position is correct." Penny strained and pushed, and gradually more of the foal appeared. When it seemed the mare's strength was flagging, Naomi gently assisted, supporting the foal as it slid into the world in a rush of fluid and membranes. "A colt!" Jackson exclaimed as the newborn sprawled in the straw, wet and gangly. Naomi quickly cleared the membrane from the foal's nose and mouth, ensuring it could breathe. Penny turned to investigate her offspring, nickering softly as she began to clean him. "He's perfect," Naomi said, watching as the colt made his first attempts to lift his head. His coat was the same rich bay as his mother's, with a small white star on his forehead. "You were amazing," Jackson said, his eyes fixed not on the foal but on Naomi. "I've never seen anything like it." Naomi felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "I just helped. Penny did all the real work." They stayed in the barn until dawn, watching as the colt made his first wobbly attempts to stand and nurse. Exhausted but exhilarated, they finally made their way back to the house as the sun broke over the horizon. "You should get some rest," Jackson said as they reached the porch. "You've earned it." Naomi nodded, suddenly aware of the state of her appearance, hair wild, clothes stained with birth fluids, hands grimy. "A bath first, I think. I'll heat some water while you change." Later, clean and rested, Naomi found Jackson in the barn, sitting on a hay bale watching Penny and her colt. He looked up as she entered, a smile spreading across his face. "I've been thinking about names," he said. "What do you think of Miracle for the colt?" Naomi sat beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. "No," Jackson replied, his voice soft. "For you." Naomi stared at him, caught off guard by the warmth in his eyes. "I'm no miracle, Jackson. You are to me." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You showed up when I needed help most, fixed things I couldn't fix myself, and brought life to a ranch that was starting to feel mighty empty." His touch sent a shiver through Naomi that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. "I should be thanking you," she managed to say. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. I'm beginning to think it was the smartest decision I ever made." Jackson's hand dropped reluctantly. "As for the colt, I was thinking silver in honor of your mining background." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Naomi deeply. "That's perfect." Over the next few weeks, life at the Double Q settled into a comfortable routine. Naomi continued to prove her worth around the ranch, tackling projects that had been neglected for too long. Jackson, meanwhile, found excuses to work alongside her more often than was strictly necessary. Their evenings on the porch grew longer, their conversations deeper. Naomi learned that Jackson had a passion for books, a secret sweet tooth, and a talent for whittling that he claimed was just a way to keep my hands busy. Jackson discovered Naomi's unexpected knowledge of astronomy, learned from night watches at mining camps, her inability to carry a tune, which didn't stop her from humming while she worked, and her fierce loyalty to those who earned her trust. What neither acknowledged openly was the growing attraction between them. It manifested in lingering glances, in the way Jackson's hand would brush against hers when passing tools, in how Naomi found herself paying extra attention to her appearance each morning despite the practical demands of ranch work. Curtis noticed, of course. The young cowhand had taken to giving Jackson knowing looks whenever Naomi entered a room, earning himself extra fence-mending duties for his trouble. One evening in late June, nearly a month after Naomi's arrival, Jackson announced they needed to make a trip into Tascosa for supplies. "We can put it off if you'd rather not go back there," he added, watching her reaction carefully. Naomi considered the offer. The memory of her humiliation at the mine still stung, but she refused to hide. "No, I'll go. I won't give them the satisfaction of thinking they scared me away." The next morning, they set out early to avoid the worst of the heat. Naomi rode the gentle gelding Jackson had promised her that first day, a dapple gray named Ghost, who had taken to her immediately. She wore her one decent dress, freshly washed and pressed, and had pinned her hair neatly beneath a modest bonnet. "You look nice," Jackson commented as they rode side by side. It was the first time he'd seen her in anything other than work clothes. "Thank you." Naomi adjusted her bonnet against the sun. "I may have been run out of town, but I still have my pride." Jackson smiled at that. "I've noticed." The 5-mile ride passed quickly, with Jackson pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's history. When they crested the final rise and Tascosa came into view, Naomi felt her stomach tighten with apprehension, but she kept her head high as they rode down the main street. The town was busy with the usual Saturday commerce. Heads turned as they passed, whispers following in their wake. Jackson guided them to Pearson's general store, dismounting first and then helping Naomi down with hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. "Let's get this over with," she murmured, squaring her shoulders. The bell above the door jangled as they entered the mercantile. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. "Mr. Quincy, good to see you again." His welcoming smile faltered when he spotted Naomi. "And, Miss Turner, this is unexpected." "Mr. Pearson," Jackson greeted, placing a protective hand at the small of Naomi's back. "Miss Turner works for me now at the Double Q. We need supplies." Pearson's eyebrows shot up, but he quickly composed himself. "Of course. What can I get for you today?" While Jackson began listing items, Naomi wandered the store, examining bolts of fabric and household goods. She was inspecting a set of cooking pots when a familiar voice made her stiffen. "Well, look who's back. Couldn't cut it as a miner, so you found yourself a protector, huh?" Naomi turned to face Thomas Wilkes, the Lone Star mine foreman who had laughed in her face when she'd applied for work. He was flanked by 2 miners, all 3 sporting expressions of smug derision. "Mr. Wilkes," she acknowledged coolly. "I found employment better suited to my many skills, yes." Wilkes snorted. "I bet you did. Old Quincy's been alone too long if he's desperate enough to hire the likes of you." His gaze raked over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Miss Turner is my ranch manager." Jackson's voice cut through the tension as he appeared at Naomi's side. "And she's accomplished more in a month than most men manage in a year." "Ranch manager," Wilkes laughed. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Jackson's expression hardened dangerously. "I suggest you watch your next words very carefully, Wilkes." The store had gone silent, other customers watching the confrontation with avid interest. Wilkes glanced around, noting the audience, and apparently decided against pushing further. "No offense meant," he said insincerely. "Just surprised to see her back in town after the way she left." "You mean after being threatened and harassed for trying to find honest work?" Naomi couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "Yes, I imagine that is surprising." "Come on, Naomi," Jackson said quietly. "Mr. Pearson is preparing our order." As they turned away, Wilkes couldn't resist one parting shot. "Hope you're paying her well, Quincy. Word is, she's got mighty expensive tastes for a miner's daughter." Jackson whipped around, but Naomi caught his arm. "He's not worth it," she murmured. "Please, Jackson." After a tense moment, Jackson nodded curtly and guided her back to the counter where Pearson was studiously pretending he hadn't witnessed the exchange. They completed their business quickly and loaded the supplies into the wagon Jackson had brought along for this purpose. As they prepared to leave town, the sheriff approached, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Quincy," he nodded. "Miss Turner, heard there was some trouble at Pearson's." "Nothing that concerns the law, Sheriff Davis," Jackson replied. Davis eyed Naomi skeptically. "You causing problems again, miss?" Before Naomi could respond, Jackson stepped forward. Miss Turner was subjected to unprovoked harassment, but chose to handle it with dignity rather than escalate the situation. "If there's a problem in your town, Sheriff, I suggest you look to men like Wilkes who think threatening women is acceptable behavior." The sheriff's face reddened. "Now see here, Quincy." "Good day, Sheriff." Jackson cut him off, helping Naomi onto Ghost before mounting his own horse. With a tip of his hat that managed to be both polite and dismissive, he turned his mare and led the way out of town, Naomi beside him and the loaded wagon following. They rode in silence until Tascosa was well behind them. Finally, Naomi spoke. "Thank you for defending me, but you shouldn't make enemies on my account." Jackson's expression was grim. "Men like Wilkes and Davis aren't worth worrying about. They're small men who feel big only when they're pushing others down. Still, your reputation in town, my reputation." Jackson laughed without humor. "Naomi, I've never cared much what Tascosa thinks of me. They tolerate me because I do business there, but I've always been an outsider." Naomi studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. "Is that why you live so far from town? Because you don't feel welcome?" "Partly," he admitted, "and partly because I prefer the company of horses to most people." His expression softened as he glanced her way. Present company accepted, of course. The compliment warmed Naomi in a way that had nothing to do with the June heat. The feeling is mutual. Back at the ranch, they unloaded the supplies together. As Naomi was storing coffee in the kitchen cupboard, Jackson leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "What Wilkes said," he began hesitantly, "about your expensive tastes. What did he mean by that?" Naomi stilled, her back to Jackson. "It's nothing, just more attempts to damage my reputation." "Naomi." His voice was gentle but insistent. "You can tell me." She turned to face him, clutching a tin of coffee to her chest like a shield. "When I first came to Tascosa, I stayed at Mrs. Holbrook's boarding house. After the mine rejected me, I couldn't pay my bill. Mrs. Holbrook suggested I could settle my debt in other ways." The memory still made her cheeks burn with humiliation. "When I refused, she told everyone I was trying to avoid paying what I owed." Understanding dawned on Jackson's face, followed quickly by anger. "That's why you were standing at the edge of town that day. You'd been evicted." Naomi nodded, setting down the coffee tin. "I had nowhere else to go." In 3 strides, Jackson crossed the kitchen and took her hands in his. "Listen to me, Naomi Turner. You are the most honorable, hard-working person I've ever met. Don't let the gossip of small-minded people make you doubt your worth for even a moment." The intensity in his eyes made it difficult to breathe. Naomi was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of his hands enveloping hers, of the faint scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to him. "Jackson," she whispered, not entirely sure what she meant to say. Whatever might have happened next was interrupted by Curtis calling from outside. "Boss, one of the cattle broke through the north fence." The moment shattered. Jackson released her hands reluctantly. "I should go help him." "Yes, of course." Naomi stepped back, trying to compose herself. "I'll finish putting things away." Jackson lingered in the doorway a moment longer, looking as though he wanted to say something more, before nodding once and heading out to deal with the escaped cow. That night, Naomi lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, replaying the moment in the kitchen. What would have happened if Curtis hadn't interrupted? Would Jackson have kissed her? Would she have wanted him to? Yes, she admitted to herself in the darkness. She would have. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She had come to the double Q for work, not romance. She had spent her life being independent, focusing on skills and survival rather than matters of the heart. And yet, in just over a month, Jackson Quincy had slipped past her defenses with his quiet strength, his unwavering respect, and his willingness to see her as she truly was. But could she risk her newfound stability on feelings that might not be reciprocated? Jackson had been kind to her, yes, even protective, but that didn't necessarily mean he harbored deeper feelings. And if he did, what then? She had no experience with romance, no mother's guidance to fall back on. Naomi turned restlessly in her bed, knowing sleep would be elusive. Outside her window, the Texas night was alive with sounds: crickets, the occasional whinny from the barn, the distant howl of coyotes. She had grown to love these sounds, to feel at home in this place that had welcomed her when nowhere else would. Whatever happened next, she couldn't bear the thought of leaving the Double Q, or of leaving Jackson. July brought blistering heat to the Texas Panhandle. The days grew longer, the work harder as drought threatened the rangeland. Naomi and Jackson fell into a rhythm of rising before dawn to complete as much work as possible before the worst of the afternoon heat, then retreating to the relative coolness of the house during the hottest hours. Something had shifted between them since that day in the kitchen. There was a new awareness in their interactions, a careful distance that hadn't been there before. They still took their meals together, still talked on the porch in the evenings, but both seemed hesitant to acknowledge the growing tension between them. One particularly stifling afternoon, as Naomi was kneading bread dough in the kitchen, Jackson burst through the door, his face tight with worry. "Silver's missing," he announced without preamble. Penny came back to the barn without him. Naomi immediately wiped her hands on her apron. "How long has he been gone?" "Not sure. Curtis noticed Penny alone about an hour ago, but they could have been separated before that." Jackson was already gathering canteens. "I'm going to search the north pasture. Curtis is checking the west boundary." "I'll take the east section," Naomi said, reaching for her hat. Jackson paused. "It's over 100 degrees out there, Naomi." All the more reason to find him quickly. She filled a canteen with water. A foal won't last long in this heat without his mother. Recognizing the determination in her eyes, Jackson nodded. "Take Ghost. He knows the eastern range better than the other horses. And Naomi," he caught her arm as she moved past him. "Be careful. There's a ravine on the eastern edge. It's dry now, but the sides are steep." "I'll be careful," she promised, touching his hand briefly before heading out to saddle Ghost. The afternoon sun was merciless as Naomi rode eastward, scanning the parched landscape for any sign of the missing foal. Ghost picked his way confidently across the familiar terrain, seeming to understand the urgency of their mission. After nearly 2 hours of searching, with sweat soaking her shirt and her water half gone, Naomi caught sight of a flash of movement in a cluster of mesquite. Directing Ghost toward it, she soon made out the form of Silver, his bay coat dusty and his small body trembling with exhaustion. "There you are," she called softly, dismounting and approaching slowly to avoid frightening the foal. Silver watched her with wide, frightened eyes but didn't bolt. As she drew closer, Naomi could see he was favoring his right front leg. "Poor boy," she murmured, finally reaching him and running gentle hands over his quivering body. "Let's get you home to your mama." The injury didn't appear serious, a strain rather than a break, but the foal was clearly exhausted and dehydrated. Naomi poured some of her precious water into her hat and held it for Silver to drink, which he did eagerly. Getting him back to the ranch would be the challenge. He couldn't walk far on his injured leg, and she couldn't carry him. After considering her options, Naomi decided their best hope was to lead Ghost while Silver followed, hoping the foal's instinct to stay with another horse would overcome his fear and pain. It worked, but progress was painfully slow. The afternoon waned into evening, the heat barely diminishing as the sun began its descent. Naomi kept a careful eye on Silver, stopping frequently to offer him water and rest. They had been walking for over an hour when Naomi heard the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw Jackson riding hard toward them, his face a mask of relief when he spotted her. "Naomi," he called, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. "We've been searching everywhere for you. I found him," she explained unnecessarily, gesturing to Silver. "But he's hurt his leg and can't move quickly. We've been making our way back slowly." Jackson knelt to examine the foal's injury. "Looks like a sprain. He'll recover, but he shouldn't walk anymore today." He looked up at Naomi, noticing her flushed face and the way she swayed slightly on her feet. "And neither should you. You're overheated." Before she could protest, Jackson had scooped up the foal and was draping him carefully across his horse's withers, securing him with rope from his saddlebags. Then he turned to Naomi, his expression brooking no argument. "Mount up on Ghost. We're going home." Too exhausted to object, Naomi allowed Jackson to help her into the saddle. To her surprise, instead of leading Ghost, Jackson swung up behind her, his arms encircling her waist as he took the reins. "What about your horse?" she asked, suddenly very aware of the solid warmth of his chest against her back. "He'll follow with Silver. Right now, my concern is getting you back before you collapse from heat exhaustion." The ride back to the ranch passed in a blur for Naomi. The heat, exhaustion, and the unfamiliar intimacy of riding in Jackson's embrace combined to create a dreamlike state where she was aware of little beyond the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the secure feeling of Jackson's arms around her. At the ranch, Curtis was waiting anxiously. He hurried to help with Silver as Jackson lifted Naomi from the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing. "Take care of the horses and the foal," Jackson instructed Curtis. "I'm getting Miss Turner inside." Despite her weak protests that she could walk, Jackson carried Naomi into the house and straight to her bedroom, setting her gently on the bed. "Stay put," he ordered, his voice gruff with concern. "I'm getting you water and cool cloths." When he returned moments later, Naomi had managed to remove her boots but nothing else, her fingers fumbling with the buttons of her sweat-soaked shirt. Jackson set down a pitcher of water and basin of cool well water on the bedside table. "Drink this first," he said, pouring water into a glass and holding it to her lips. Naomi drank gratefully, the cool liquid reviving her somewhat. "Silver?" she asked when she had drained the glass. "Curtis is settling him with Penny. He'll be fine." Jackson dipped a cloth in the basin, wrung it out, and hesitated. "You need to cool down. Your clothes." Understanding his dilemma, Naomi nodded weakly. "Help me with the buttons. I can manage the rest once you leave." With careful, almost reverent movements, Jackson unfastened the buttons of her shirt. His knuckles occasionally brushed against the skin of her neck and collarbone, sending shivers through her despite the heat. When he reached the last button, he stepped back immediately. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," he said, his voice hoarse. "Call when you're decent and I'll bring you more water." Alone, Naomi managed to remove her sweat-soaked clothes and don a light cotton nightgown. The cool cloths Jackson had brought were heavenly against her overheated skin. When she felt somewhat recovered, she called softly for him. Jackson entered with fresh water and a plate of bread and cheese. "You should eat something," he said, setting the food beside her bed. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in her nightclothes, hair loose around her shoulders, but he quickly composed himself. "Thank you," Naomi said, suddenly shy, "for everything today." Jackson sat carefully on the edge of the bed, maintaining a proper distance. "You're the one who found Silver, if you hadn't." He didn't finish the sentence, but the emotion in his eyes spoke volumes. "You could have died out there today, Naomi. When you didn't return, I thought—" He broke off, his voice tight. "I'm fine," she assured him, reaching out to touch his hand. "Just tired and overheated." His fingers curled around hers. "Promise me you won't take risks like that again." "I can't promise that," Naomi replied honestly. Not if someone needs help. Not if Silver or Penny or you needed me. Something flickered in Jackson's eyes at her words. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. You are the most stubborn, infuriating, remarkable woman I have ever met, he murmured against her skin. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Jackson. The moment hung between them, fragile and charged with possibility. Then, reluctantly, Jackson released her hand and stood. You need rest. We can talk more tomorrow. As he moved toward the door, Naomi called after him. Jackson, Silver is really all right. He paused, looking back at her with a tender expression that made her heart skip. Yes, thanks to you, he's safe with his mother. Now get some sleep, Naomi. Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor, she pointed out, a smile tugging at her lips despite her exhaustion. No, he agreed, returning her smile. But I am the boss, remember. After he left, closing the door softly behind him, Naomi lay back against her pillows. Too tired to eat but too stirred by the events of the day to sleep immediately. Jackson's kiss on her hand had been a gesture that could be interpreted as merely gentlemanly concern, but the look in his eyes had suggested something deeper. Tomorrow, she decided as sleep finally began to claim her. Tomorrow they would talk, but tomorrow brought unexpected complications. Naomi woke late, her body stiff and sore from the previous day's exertions. When she finally made her way to the kitchen, she found only Curtis, who informed her that Jackson had ridden to a neighboring ranch to help with a dangerous bull that had broken through a fence. Said he might be gone a couple days, Curtis added, pouring her coffee. Told me to keep an eye on you and make sure you rested. Disappointment settled in Naomi's chest. After the charged moment in her bedroom, Jackson's absence felt like a retreat. Had she misread his intentions? Was he now avoiding her out of regret or embarrassment? The questions plagued her throughout the day as she tended to Silver, who was recovering well, cleaned the house, and prepared meals. By evening, she had worked herself into a state of anxious uncertainty, replaying every interaction with Jackson over the past weeks, second-guessing her interpretations. Curtis, sensing her distraction, tried to reassure her. Boss will be back soon enough, Miss Turner. You know how he is always helping folks when they are in a bind. Of course, Naomi agreed, forcing a smile. It's admirable. 2 more days passed with no sign of Jackson. Naomi threw herself into ranch work, ignoring Curtis's admonitions to rest. She spent extra time with Penny and Silver, finding comfort in the uncomplicated affection of the horses. Each evening, she sat on the porch watching the road until darkness made it impossible to see. On the morning of the 4th day, as Naomi was gathering eggs from the chicken coop, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Heart leaping, she set down her basket and hurried to the front of the house just as Jackson rode in, looking dusty and tired but unharmed. Relief washed over her, quickly followed by self-consciousness. What should she say? How should she act? Before she could decide, Jackson had dismounted and was striding toward her, his face breaking into a smile that erased all her doubts. Naomi, he said, stopping just short of reaching for her. You're looking well. Recovered from your adventure? Yes, completely, she assured him, drinking in the sight of him as if he'd been gone months instead of days. Was everything all right at the Henderson Ranch? Jackson nodded, removing his hat and running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. That bull was even meaner than reported, but we managed to get him penned eventually. His eyes never left her face. I missed you. The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Naomi's heart thundered in her chest. I missed you too, she admitted quietly. Something shifted in Jackson's expression, a decision being made. Naomi, there's something I need to tell you, something I've been wanting to say for weeks now. Before he could continue, the sound of an approaching wagon interrupted them. Both turned to see a fine carriage coming up the drive, pulled by a matched pair of black horses, a rare sight in this part of Texas. "Are you expecting visitors?" Naomi asked, puzzled. Jackson shook his head, his expression darkening. "No, and that's Judge Harmon's carriage. Whatever brings him out this way can't be good news." The carriage pulled up before the house, and a distinguished-looking gentleman in a black suit descended. Despite the heat, he appeared perfectly composed, not a hair out of place or a drop of sweat visible. "Mr. Quincy," he greeted, tipping his hat. "And this must be Miss Turner. My name is Judge William Harmon from Tascosa." "What can we do for you, Judge?" Jackson asked, his tone carefully neutral, though Naomi could sense his tension. The judge extracted a document from his jacket. "I'm afraid I'm here on rather unpleasant business. I've received a complaint from Mrs. Holbrook of Tascosa regarding unpaid debts owed by Miss Turner. She's filed a formal claim against Miss Turner's wages." Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. "That's not possible. I've been saving to pay her what I owe, but I haven't had the chance to return to town." "How much is the alleged debt?" Jackson asked, his jaw tight. Judge Harmon consulted the paper. $20 for room and board, plus an additional $10 in interest and fees. Interest and fees. Jackson's voice rose with indignation. "For a debt less than 3 months old? That's usury." "Perhaps," the judge conceded, "but the law allows creditors considerable latitude in such matters. Unless the debt is settled immediately, I'm authorized to issue a writ allowing Mrs. Holbrook to claim Miss Turner's possessions in compensation, including any wages earned during her employment here." Naomi's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "This is nothing but vindictiveness because I refuse to accept her alternative method of payment." Understanding flickered across Judge Harmon's face, but he merely shrugged. "The law concerns itself with financial obligations, not the character of the creditor. Do you have the $30, Miss Turner?" "I have 15 saved," Naomi admitted, humiliation burning in her cheeks. "I can pay the rest when I receive my next wages." "I'm afraid that won't suffice. The full amount must be paid today or I must execute the writ." "This is absurd," Jackson interjected. "I'll pay the debt myself." "No," Naomi turned to him, pride flaring. "I won't have you settling my debts. This is my responsibility." Jackson met her eyes, his expression softening. "It's just a loan, Naomi. You can repay me from your wages." "Or," Judge Harmon interrupted, "there is another option. Mrs. Holbrook has indicated she would drop all claims if Miss Turner returns to Tascosa to work off her debt directly." "What kind of work?" Jackson demanded, though Naomi suspected they both knew the answer. The judge had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That would be between Mrs. Holbrook and Miss Turner to negotiate." "Absolutely not." Jackson's voice was like steel. "Naomi isn't going anywhere." He reached into his pocket, extracted a wallet, and counted out $30. "Here's your money, Judge. Consider the debt paid in full." Judge Harmon accepted the money with a nod. "I'll need a receipt signed by both parties acknowledging settlement of the debt." He produced a form from his case and quickly filled it out, having Jackson and Naomi sign before adding his own signature as witness. "That concludes our business. Good day to you both." As the judge's carriage disappeared down the drive, Naomi stood rigid with humiliation and anger. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. "It wasn't your responsibility." Jackson turned to her, frustration evident in his expression. "Would you prefer I let him take you back to that woman? You know what kind of work she had in mind." "Of course not. But I could have found another solution. I've been taking care of myself for a long time, Jackson." "I know that," he said, his voice softening. But you don't have to anymore, Naomi. That's what I've been trying to tell you. Naomi looked up at him, confusion replacing anger. What do you mean? Jackson stepped closer, taking her hands in his. I mean that I care for you, more than I've ever cared for anyone. These past months, watching you work, seeing your determination, your intelligence, your kindness, I've fallen in love with you, Naomi Turner. The declaration left her speechless, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. I know it's sudden, Jackson continued when she didn't respond. And I know you came here for work, not this, but I can't pretend anymore. When I thought you might be hurt out there looking for silver, I realized life without you would be unbearable. His hands tightened around hers. I don't expect you to feel the same. All I ask is that you consider the possibility of something more between us. Naomi finally found her voice. It's not sudden, she whispered. Not for me. Hope blazed in Jackson's eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've been falling in love with you since the day you found me on the edge of town and told me my hands were needed. Naomi's voice strengthened with conviction. You saw me, Jackson. Not as a woman trying to do a man's job, not as someone to be pitied or used, but as a person with skills and value. How could I not love you for that? With a sound that was half laugh, half sigh, Jackson pulled her into his arms. Naomi Turner, you are a miracle, he murmured before his lips found hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with months of pent-up longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said simply. Be my partner in everything, the ranch life, all of it. Your hands aren't just needed here, they are essential. I don't want to imagine the double Q without you in it. Tears welled in Naomi's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you. Jackson kissed her again, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at once, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from uncertainty to absolute clarity. What about my debt to you? Naomi asked, suddenly remembering the $30. I still intend to repay it. Jackson grinned, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Consider it a wedding present, or better yet, invest it in our future. This ranch is as much yours now as it is mine. The enormity of the moment washed over Naomi. From homeless and rejected to loved and valued in the span of a few short months, it seemed almost too much happiness to bear. I love you, Jackson Quincy, she said, the words feeling both new and familiar on her tongue. And I promise to make you proud of your decision to stop that day and help a stranger. I've never made a better one, he assured her, drawing her close once more. Though asking you to marry me might come close. From the barn came a welcoming Winnie Penny calling to her master. Silver's answering neigh, higher and more exuberant, made them both smile. Sounds like they approve, Naomi observed. Smart horses, Jackson replied, lacing his fingers through hers. Now, what do you say we go tell Curtis he's about to get a new boss? Hand in hand, they walked toward the barn, toward the future they would build together on the land they both loved. The wedding took place on a crisp October day when the worst of the summer heat had finally broken, and the Texas Panhandle was painted in autumnal golds and russets. It was a small affair, held on the double Q with only a handful of guests, neighboring ranchers who had come to respect Jackson, and by extension, his unconventional bride. Naomi wore a simple white dress ordered from a catalog and altered with her own hands. She carried wildflowers gathered that morning, and her hair was adorned with a lace veil that had been Jackson's mother's, the one treasure he had kept from his difficult childhood. Curtis served as best man, beaming with pride as if he had personally arranged the match. The ceremony was performed by a circuit preacher who made no comment on the unusual circumstances of their meeting or Naomi's reputation in Tascosa. His blessing was sincere, his smile genuine as he pronounced them husband and wife. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. A feast prepared by neighboring ranch wives, music provided by a fiddler from a nearby homestead, and dancing that lasted well into the night. Even Mrs. Holbrook's vindictiveness couldn't cast a shadow on the day news had reached them that she had left Tascosa shortly after the incident with Judge Harmon. Her boarding house sold to a widow with a kinder disposition. As the last guests departed and twilight deepened into night, Jackson and Naomi stood on the porch of what was now truly their home, his arm around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. "Happy, Mrs. Quincy?" he asked, the new name still bringing a smile to both their lips. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Naomi confirmed, turning in his embrace to face him. "But I was thinking about something." "What's that?" "The silver," she said, watching his expression carefully. "My father always said there were signs in this part of Texas. The rock formations, the type of soil. I've noticed it on the North Ridge." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "You still think there's silver on the double Q?" "I know there is," Naomi replied with the confidence that had first caught his attention. "Not enough for a major operation, but a small mine properly managed. It could provide security for us for our future." "Our future, hum?" Jackson's hands tightened at her waist. "And what do you see in this future of ours, Naomi Quincy?" Her smile was radiant in the gathering darkness. "Children eventually, a larger herd, perhaps even indoor plumbing someday." She laughed at his expression. "What? A woman can dream, can't she?" "Dream all you want," Jackson murmured, pulling her closer. "As long as I'm part of those dreams." "Always," Naomi promised, rising on tiptoe to meet his kiss. The years that followed fulfilled the promise of that October day. The small silver mine Naomi insisted on exploring indeed yielded enough ore to provide a comfortable cushion against the inevitable lean years that came with ranching. The Double Q expanded, acquiring adjacent properties when they became available, growing into one of the most prosperous operations in the region. Children came too: first a son, Samuel, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. Then twin daughters, Elizabeth and Catherine, who learned to ride almost before they could walk. The house expanded with the family, the long-promised indoor plumbing finally installed when Naomi was expecting their fourth child, another boy they named James, after Jackson's benefactor. Through it all, through drought and flood, through illness and health, through the normal arguments that come with any marriage and the joyous reconciliations that followed, Jackson and Naomi remained partners in the truest sense. They worked side by side, raised their children with love and respect, and never forgot the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, with their children grown or nearly so, Jackson surprised Naomi with a special gift, a silver pendant in the shape of a horse, crafted from the first ore taken from their mine. "To remind you," he said as he fastened it around her neck, "that you were right all along, about the silver, about us, about everything." "Not everything," Naomi corrected with a smile, touching the pendant reverently. "I never imagined I could be this happy." Jackson tucked a strand of silver-streaked hair behind her ear, a gesture unchanged in all their years together. "Your hands were needed, Naomi Quincy, but it was your heart that truly built our life here." "Our hands," she corrected, lacing her fingers through his. "Our hearts, together." As they stood on the porch of the home they had created, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in the same brilliant colors that had witnessed the beginning of their love story, Naomi reflected on the long, winding path that had brought her to this moment. From a miner's daughter with too much boldness for the world's comfort, to a respected rancher's wife, mother, and businesswoman in her own right, it was a journey she could never have predicted but would never trade for any other. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Naomi smiled up at the man who had seen her value when no one else would, the man who had become her partner, her lover, her best friend. "I was thinking about how sometimes being shunned turns out to be the greatest blessing of all if it leads you to where you're truly meant to be." Jackson pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And where is that, Mrs. Quincy?" "Right here," Naomi answered simply. "Right where I've always belonged." Their laughter mingled with the evening breeze, carried across the prosperous ranch that stood as testament to what could be built when hands that were needed joined with hearts that were whole. And in that moment, as in all the moments of their shared life, Naomi and Jackson were exactly where they were meant to be together, under the vast Texas sky, their love as enduring as the land itself.